Welcome, one and all, to Pacific 4 and 4 episode review. I'm your host, Mike, and this review is going to be for the Orville New Horizons episode 3 Morality Paradox. Now, this review will contain some minor spoilers just to go through what's happening in the episode. This episode begins with Talia returning from a vacation. She talks to Commander Grayson and she updates Commander Grayson on her parents on Solea. And then we get a shot on the bridge where the crew is trying some Solean chocolate trusses, courtesy of Talia. Then they get a distress signal from a planet called Neuron 1. What we learn about this planet is that it's a desert planet. So the crew sets course to Neuron 1, yet when they get there, it's not desert, it's full of forest. Gordon, Kelly, Ed, and Bortus take a shuttlecraft down to the planet's surface. When they arrive down on the planet's surface, they find a high school called Oakwood High School. They go into the high school, they start looking around, the bell rings to go to the next class, and there's a funny moment where Gordon asks one of the students that's walking down the hallway, what's the date, what's the year, and the student says to Gordon, "Are you high?" And Gordon says, "Possibly." So after all the students enter their various classrooms, the crew go their separate ways exploring the high school. You have Talia and Bortus who enter history class. Gordon's walking down the hallway by himself. Ed and Kelly are together, and Gordon ends up getting jumped by a few bullies, and these bullies tell Gordon that he owes money to someone named Randall. So after these bullies beat the living crap out of Gordon, Talia and Bortus come back. They manage to find Gordon, who's lying on the floor in the men's bathroom, and then they meet up with Ed and Kelly, who see that Gordon's injuries are real according to Bortus. We next see our Valiant away team enter the cafeteria, and of course you have the table with the popular girls, the mean girls, who are exactly that to Bortus and the crew. Although there's another funny moment where Bortus tells one of the popular girls, the mean girls, "You have a 5-head." Then we also have the table with all the outcasts, the nerds, the geeks, the dorks, that kind of setup there. Then the crew walks out onto the football field after school ends to try to meet up with this Randall so Gordon can pay him back for money he never actually owes him. But with this scenario, Gordon supposedly owes him some money. So they're walking down on the football field,
And we meet Randall.
looks like a Rancor. He honestly looks like a Rancor, but a Rancor carrying an axe. So there's a fight that goes on, and the crew pulls out their blasters. At one point, Talia goes to one of the benches, takes off the back of one of the benches, throws it at this Rancor-looking Randall, and it impales him on the side of his cheek. The crew sees a doorway. They enter this doorway, and as soon as they enter this doorway, they end up on a plane. When they get on this plane, they're confronted by a flight attendant who tells them to take their seats. Gordon makes a distinct observation as to what happened to him when they were fighting off Randall, that when Randall picked him up, his eyes turned white. And by his, I'm talking about Gordon. So Gordon's talking to the crew, and he's explaining to the crew how old planes were designed, because every time the plane reaches a clear pocket of air, it goes up or down to reach more turbulence. And at one point, the flight attendant comes along, and Gordon says that if the pilots in the flight deck need any help, that he's a pilot and he'd be able to help him out, and the flight attendant assures him that they're in good hands. They hit another pocket of turbulence. Gordon, Ed, Kelly, Bortus, and Talia decide we're going to go into the flight deck, or else they can't get into the door. So Talia rips the door off its hinges, and when they're looking into the flight deck area, the cockpit, They notice that there's no pilots, there's no co-pilot, there's nobody in this flight deck. So Gordon takes the pilot seat, Ed takes the co-pilot seat. They're all on the flight deck, and Ed asks Gordon, "Can you fly this thing?" And Gordon says, "We're about to find out." Well, they're hitting pockets of turbulence, and there's lightning, there's thunder, and all of a sudden Gordon looks at the gauges and notices that they're low on fuel. Going out of fuel, the plane is in a rapid descent, and Gordon's trying to land it safely. Bortus sees a clear patch where the plane can land on this mountainside. Gordon tells Ed to lower the flaps. They lower the flaps. The plane does land. It gets on the edge of this mountain, and when it comes to rest and the crew leaves the flight deck, they notice that none of the passengers who were at one time in the plane are on board the plane. The crew exits the plane, and when they exit the plane, they find themselves going down this long staircase. They conduct a scan, and the scan shows that the ground underneath them is not there and that it's a bottomless drop. So they keep descending this long staircase, and they find themselves in a Mocklin morgue. And in this morgue, you see these pods that are raised up in the air, and Bortus tells them that for 9 days, the dead are placed in these pods, and it gives them 9 days to basically wrap up everything on Mocklin before they go to the great beyond. As they're exploring this morgue with all these pods, the pods open up, and one of the pods has a dead Bortus in it. Bortus is looking at himself. His dead self grabs him, lifts him up off the ground, and tries to strangle him. As our Bortus is being strangled, his eyes go white, just like Gordon's did. And let me go back, because when the plane was making its rapid descent for the crash landing, Ed's eyes go white. Also, Ed, because of what happened on the plane, has this large gash on this side of his forehead. So after the crew frees Bortus and they leave the morgue, they find themselves on Solea. Yet Ed makes a key observation that if they were on the actual Solea, due to the gravity, everybody but Talia would be dead due to the intense gravity. As they're looking around, they see a flash of light, and they're going, "Is that some sort of code? Is that some sort of communication?" So they go on a raft. Meanwhile, as all this is going on, Commander Lamar's in command of the Orville, and they're trying to find signs of the away team. And one of the things that Isaac had made an observation of was that this planet, Neuron 1, has a large magnetic field. It's too large for the planet as they know it. One of the reasons why they even went to this planet is because of this large magnetic field, which from Isaac's perspective and his scans, he says it would mean that there's a dense population on this planet, and there shouldn't be. So as they're scanning for the shuttle and the life signs of the away team, Lamar says, "I want you to go down there with Claire and look for the away team." Of course, before that even happens, Charlie gets a little PO'd at Isaac because of some of the things that Isaac is saying, and she also mentions the fact that Kalons don't value life like they do, and Lamar does a great thing by telling both Isaac and Charlie to zip it, get down there and locate the away team. And when Claire and Isaac and the away team get down there in their shuttle, they see the shuttle that Ed and the other members of that away team took is still in its original landing position. Getting back to Ed, Gordon, Kelly, Bortus, and Talia, they go onto the raft, except when Ed goes onto the raft, Kelly says to Ed, "You know, that's a pretty large gash you have on your head. You better stay ashore with Bortus." Bortus and Ed end up staying ashore. Kelly, Gordon, and Talia take the raft, and they're going toward the light that's flashing. And as they're going toward this light that's crashing, they hear this rumble, and they see that there's this very large creature swimming underneath them. a kraken. And as they're going along, the kraken's tentacles grab onto Kelly, pull her under the water, and it's a rapid descent. Talia goes to rescue her, and as Kelly's struggling for her life, being drowned by this large kraken, her eyes go white. So Talia and Kelly are eventually able to escape the kraken and get back to the surface. Ed asks Kelly once Gordon, Talia, and Kelly get back to shore, she's all right. Kelly mentions to Ed that she's experienced the same out-of-body experience that they've all had. Even Talia mentions it. And then all of a sudden, this door pops up. And Ed says, no, I've had enough of this. No more. We're not playing any more of these games. We're not doing whatever you want us to do. We're done. It's over. End this. At one point, Ed, Kelly, Gordon, Bortus, and Talia detect an energy signature coming from a cave. When they get there, they find out that it's a holographic generator, but they can't deactivate it because it's a shield. So Bortus uses his comm scanner to deactivate the shield. Ed destroys this holographic generator, and they find that they've been on Neuron 1 as it should be this whole time. They go back to the ship. Blair did some scans, and there's a lot of high activity, neuron activity on their brains, and she starts explaining what's going on. And of course, they pick up the pieces of the holographic generator before they return to the ship. Isaac's making his analysis and his report and says that some of these pieces are Kalon. Ed gets on the comms with Admiral Halsey and tells him that this is what's going on. There's Kalon activity. Talia detected it as she was coming back to the ship, even though it was very faint. Admiral Halsey says, we're going to send 5 ships your way. The crew of the Orville's waiting for the 5 ships to arrive. They arrive, yet they're not what you think they are. They turn out to be Kalon. So the ships, doing all these evasive maneuvers, trying to thwart off the Kalon attack. And when they're in the middle of this attack, all of a sudden, everything stops. And we meet this alien being who reveals that they've been part of this simulation. Not only is this an alien being, this episode in itself connects back to season 1 with Mad Ideology. That's the episode where Kelly's perceived to be a god, the Book of Kelly, and Kelly will punish you, the Kelly will do this, Kelly will do that. And then Isaac had gone down to the planet, and the planet had advanced 700 years. Of course, they had to wait several days for the planet to reappear. What this being tells the crew is essentially they got bored and they wanted to experience what it's like to live through the eyes of another species. Ed doesn't approve of it. The crew doesn't approve of it, saying that this is wrong. You shouldn't use this as test subjects. We used to use animals as test subjects, is what he tells her. And regardless of how you look at it, it's wrong. The being seems to somewhat understand, but she also says, we'll be watching you and we'll be keeping an eye on you to see how you progress. What did I think of this episode? Well, if anybody watched my live reaction to this episode, you'll know that after the end of the episode, when I gave my out of 5-star rating for the episode, my initial thoughts on this episode was that it was a 2 out of 5. Now, upon rewatching this episode, I have to say I liked it more. This episode's a 3 out of 5. Really did enjoy it the second time watching it, and maybe part of that was because I knew what was coming. I started seeing similarities between a couple of different episodes of Star Trek that I've watched before. And one of the episodes I want to mention is Future Imperfect from TNG, and another episode is from Deep Space Nine, Season 3, The Search, where in Future Imperfect, Riker's put into this holographic simulation where it's a reality where he's in the future, he suffered some memory loss, and the Federation and Romulans are negotiating a peace treaty. This peace treaty brings them together. This holographic representation, which turns out that there was this boy who was bored because he was the last of his species, and he created this simulation so he could have some company. Then, in the search for Deep Space Nine Season 3, which it was actually the season premiere for Deep Space Nine, in Part 2, we learn that after the crew is taken back to Deep Space Nine after looking for the founders, they find out that it was all a simulation to see how the crew would respond to a different change in environment where the Federation was seeking an alliance with the Dominion, and they were not including the Romulans. After all, the Romulans were considered expendable, the last resort of the crew in order to save the entire Alpha Quadrant was to take a runabout and fire some micro torpedoes at the wormhole, and that's where the simulation ends. It's because it's deemed too dangerous, and also because of help from Kira and Odo. The Orville's doing a nice job. Now, I will admit, I didn't like it as much as Electric Sheep, but still, a 3 out of 5 ain't bad. And this could almost be a 4, but I'm sticking with a 3 out of 5. I highly recommend to anybody who hasn't watched season 3 of the Orville, or if you haven't watched the Orville at all, give it a chance. In the first 2 seasons, there is some comedy, but you'll notice in season 2, they kind of go away from the comedy a little bit and it gets more serious. Now, there was some comedy in this episode, which is good. You need that levity. But the way they're doing it in this season, it's very much like Star Trek used to be. And that's one of the things that appeals to me about this series. When they do their homages to Star Trek or any other sci-fi franchise, their tributes to these franchises by honoring what came before and trying to put their own little twist and spin on it. If you're on the fence about the series, give this series a chance. This is it for this review. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up. If you didn't like this video, give it a thumbs down. Share this video with your friend. Comment down in the comment section below. And remember, I'm not just a baseball guy, I'm an all-around guy. Take care, everyone.